Hello, welcome back. Mike from Canavan Wealth. What's going on with the banks? Part two, the return. So my first video on this was one of my most viewed videos. I think my most viewed video by far. And it's 2 weeks on here, and I'd like to do kind of a recap as to where we are. And that is a complicated answer as to kind of what's going on. So we look at this is the most recent article that come out on the Wall Street Journal. This is kind of all over the place, and this was even last week. It was updated today, but this actual article came out I think Thursday last week. So it's talking about kind of the Fed's response and what some of their regulators are saying. What happened to Silicon Valley Bank, and the Fed here is largely blaming the bank for misappropriating risk around their holdings, specifically in treasuries. I'm not going to go through all that again. That was in the first video, which I'll put in the information below. But for me, I like the Fed. I think they're doing a good job through all of this. But I have to question whether these clear risks that they're missed were not, or maybe being a little overstated, specifically through the fact that we went through unprecedented rate hikes, right? You got to remember that the Fed are the people that did these rate hikes literally faster than we have ever seen in history, right? It is unreasonable, in my opinion, for a risk department to assume that rate hikes will be faster than history has ever seen. Right? Probably like in any country. I haven't looked at other countries' kind of rate hikes, but certainly here in the US, we've never raised rates as fast as we did. And then for the people who did that to then blame the banking system for it, I think you have to take what they're saying with a little bit of a grain of salt. It's undoubted that there were problems at Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, right? These smaller banks that were dealing in such specialized clients that they should have seen. But I feel like the Fed should have seen this coming as well. And we see that in this same article where a lot of now it's the politicians, not the regulators. A lot of the politicians are saying, why weren't our regulators more on top of this, right? Specific in, a lot of them have, kind of pointed to recent changes in regulation. So right here it's talking about, right, there's this 2018, of course, Trump era regulation where they increase the amount that you need to have in order to be under certain regulations. Silicon Valley Bank, of course, was just below this number. I'm not sure this would have, if this had been not in effect, I think it's a lot of he said, she said as to, who, would have come out of this. I think one of the big questions right now that the Fed is facing and is this FDIC insurance question, right? Of course. So Silicon Valley Bank, the vast majority, I think it was like 85% of its deposits were not FDIC insured because they were bigger than $250,000. And yet they covered, a lot of these deposits largely to prevent further concern about the banking industry. And it's not that the money wasn't there. It's that most of the assets, although they were underwater, they just couldn't liquidate them fast enough. Silicon Valley Bank had 60 billion in deposits removed in like 3 days, which was like a quarter of their holdings, right? No bank can handle that. And there's not a single bank on this planet that if people show up for 25% of their holdings in 3 days, that works, right? So, again, I'm not trying to dissuade the concern over Silicon Valley Bank. I have no doubt that there was mistakes made and that, maybe, greed or whatever it is you want to blame it on. However, what is FDIC insurance going to do in the future? That is going to be a big question that's going to come out of this. And so then I want to address kind of the bailout issue of this, right? I think how the Fed, largely the banking industry, has bailed themselves out in this. So most of the banks that have struggled, so there've been a couple like First Republic and Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse obviously actually got bought out, and that struggled, and it did not require the government come in to say, we're going to take over these like they did in 2008. The banking industry, the bigger banks effectively came in and said, we're either going to buy you or we're simply going to put a bunch of deposits of our money in your bank so that the banking system itself, more cracks don't develop in the banking system, which is a great way for the banks to cooperate, and was honestly a really good news story through all of this. Um, so that, I want to address this idea that we should let things fail and that it's greed. This I hear this a lot from, be perfectly honest, sometimes both sides of the political spectrum, right? But oftentimes I hear this from the liberal leaning people. I have friends who tell me this, that like they don't care if the economy collapses because it's rigged or whatever it is. And I often point out to them that the economy, especially the US economy, is so incredibly important to everyone in the world, let alone US citizens, that I don't think you understand what you're talking about if you don't mind the US economy failing, right? 2008 was a bad financial crisis, but it was not the failing of the US economy, right? If the US economy failed, not only would rich people in America feel it, but middle class and poor people would be devastated, and so would the rest of the world, right? The US economy, I often say, is the foundation upon which the world economy is built. And the idea of letting it fail is just, I think, a major misrepresentation as to what the world would look like after that, right? You would not be going to your white collar job or your home building job or anything along those lines if the banking system of America failed, right? That is, you're talking about Mad Max world, all right? So when we bail out banks, are we bailing out rich people? Sure, you can look at it that way. We are also preventing a major economic catastrophe from affecting lots and lots of working class Americans, right? Is the truth of it. That's how I choose to see it. You may choose to see it differently. All right, so the news has moved on. It was funny because I went to do research on this, and this is just the Google search that I did, which is bank industry collapse. And every single one of these articles was written at least a week ago. Like these are all the major things, right? 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, March 11th, March 20th. So yeah, March 14th. There's not a lot of news coming out on this because there's not a lot going on. Last week there was still like Deutsche Bank was kind of making headlines, First Republic. Is that a good sign? We're not through this. Anyone who's going to convince you like this is over, old news, that is not the case, right? This is going to persist for a little while, these worries around the banking industry and interest rates. However, it's good to see that lots of things are not cropping up, lots of problems in banking. There's not a whole lot of in-depth journalism coming out about cracks, probably because it's not there, right? Any news organization in the world wants to be the first to break the news on whatever it is banks that's about to go under, anything along those lines. So the fact that the news has largely moved on, even the Wall Street Journal really isn't covering it. I don't think there's a single article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal is about the banking industry. They updated the one that I was talking about, but like I said, that was an older article. Okay, so and then we've been talking about the kind of further shift to bigger banks. So there's been discussion around this stratification of banks, and big banks. That's where the faith is. It's these regional banks because one of my colleagues and I were talking about if we're going to just have a bunch 6 different big banks, and how would that look? And we talked about kind of all the repercussions, and I'm not sure that that's the way we're going to go, or if we would just like literally federalize the banking system. I don't think that's a good solution either. So this would be interesting to see kind of what do regional banks 10, 20 years from now make it out of this. I think they do. I think as soon as they're gone, there will be a vacuum, a need, and they will crop back up again, right? So I don't think the solution is just to make bigger banks. And the regulators are not brushing this off. So if we go, so I get all my news from the Wall Street Journal because I pay for it. I don't pay for the New York Times. I think it's also slightly more political than the Wall Street Journal. But I brought up the Wall Street Journal's kind of page on banking here. You can't actually click on any of these because it's behind a paywall. But Europe's regulators are looking at this. We already talked about U.S. regulators. They are not sleeping on this. This is going to be a major event that is going to change policy, and the pendulum will probably swing back towards where it was swinging after 2008, where we're going to put on more regulations, and then 4 to 5 years from now, we'll decide that we kind of overshot on that, and we'll back off on some of those regulations, and then we'll have another problem, and we'll regulate more as we try and get to the right path, right? Because the right path in 2008 was different than the right path in 2018. It was different than the right path in 2023 right now. We're never going to have perfect regulations around banks, despite the fact that, everyone thinks that's what we're capable of. This is the part that scares me still, is where commercial real estate is in conjunction with where banks are right now, right? So banks right now, a lot of their treasuries and a lot of their secure interest-bearing investments are underwater because of the historic high interest rates. These banks also do a lot of commercial real estate lending, and the commercial real estate market is vulnerable right now, mostly due to office buildings. In that office buildings, not a lot of people, right? We're still working remotely, and we don't know where the demand is going to fall out for office spaces, and whether we're going to see some type of a commercial, largely in major metropolitan area, collapse office space. And this, you've seen that, it was one of the articles on the New York Times. It's down here. This has also been all over the Wall Street Journal. So when I say that this banking crisis is not over, this is one of the things that scares me. Not enough to be too concerned about it, because I literally today on Mike Reed's Journal covered how even though office space is not doing well, warehouse space is booming in the same commercial industry. So, and I think a lot of these office spaces can be converted into apartments, which is already happening all over the country. And that is a huge need, right? We have a huge housing need in the country. So I'm not that worried about it, but it definitely is where, my concern lays with the future of what's going on with the banks. And then this is kind of going back to the economy, the idea of letting the economy fail is flawed, and that the regulators are not brushing this off. Everyone involved in this, they're just people. It took me a while, when I started to hit my mid 30s, I think that's when I decided all these other people that are experts, they're just people, right? The president, the doctor I'm talking to, whoever it is, it's just a person, and hopefully they're doing their best. But their best is almost certainly always going to be not good enough, right? The Fed, the people who ran Silicon Valley Bank, the politicians who are, trying to decide who's to blame for all of this and decide on regulations in the future, along with the Fed, they're all just people. They're trying to do the best job they can, and they are almost always going to fall short. We're never going to have perfect bank regulations. Our banking system's never going to be perfect. The politicians who make up the laws and fight like cats and dogs about it are never going to do a perfect job. They're just going to do the job, and that's what we're going to live with. And that's how I kind of view everything in the world. So I try not to make it a blame game. And, when they bail out whoever it is, they're not, even though the news and the media want to villainize whoever it is, I truly believe that the politicians and the regulators and the people involved in that are doing it and thinking about the U.S. population and the workforce and the catastrophic damage that would be done if people lost faith in the U.S. banking system, right? So it's just a bunch of people doing the best job that they can. That's what's going on with the banks. If you find videos like this useful, it would be great if you liked it, and you can subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. Otherwise, you can send any questions you have to Mike@canavanwealth.com. You can get to a lot of this stuff off my website as well, canavanwealth.com. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you.